Bom dia, boa tarde, or boa noite. Welcome to my little presentation on how I learned many vocabulary words by reading the labels and the packages at the grocery store during my 3 years living in Brazil. This is one of the literacy practices that I utilized to improve my Portuguese. I decided to start this presentation with white rice because the most traditional of Brazilian meals is to serve red beans or black beans and rice. At the beginning, I wasn't a big fan of rice and beans, but today I still love it and would eat it every day if the opportunity were made available to me. So this is a typical package of rice in Brazil, and you can see how it clearly states arroz branco, white rice. This is where I learned that word. And I decided to move on to make the second slide red beans, because that was my preferred kind of beans to put on the rice. You can see at the top this says it's feijão vermelho. I decided to throw in a little to demonstrate how languages are not always logical. So what we just saw were red beans, right? Feijão vermelho. So that means that string beans should be feijão verde, but they're not. They're a completely different word. Vagem macarrão. And I've always thought that this was a funny name for corn. This is a can of corn. In Portuguese, they call it milho verde. Milho is basically the word for grain. Verde means green. So I've never understood why they called it milho verde, but I never forgot that's what it's called. A little caveat, Brazilian corn is terrible. The other foreigners used to call it horse corn. Most food in Brazil was amazing, especially compared to our processed, over-pesticized fruits and vegetables here in the States. But corn is something that we do better than they do by far. I'm sure that you can recognize these as apples. I tried hard to choose photos that clearly had written on them the Portuguese word for the item that I'm talking about. This one, it was hard to find something. It actually does say maçã on there in small words, but you might not be able to see that in the video. Apples were something that were kind of a luxury where I lived in Brazil, because I lived on the equator in the tropics. Apples were imported from southern Brazil, and they were never as good as what we can get in the States. I think mostly because Brazil doesn't have a climate in very many places that can grow apples. But anyway, these were apples. They were called maçã. Let's move on to milk, which is a very similar word as it is in Spanish. It's called leite. Leite. Where I lived in Brazil, it always came in these packages for long shelf life, because for some reason there were no cows in northern Brazil. And that was a shock for me when I first got there, that I couldn't find fresh milk. Occasionally I could find fresh milk, but most of the time I had to settle for the milk with the high shelf life. Here is a bag of flour called farinha de trigo. Farinha is really the word for flour. They have many kinds of flours, just like we do. And trigo is the word for wheat. Here's sugar. Unfortunately, one of my favorite substances in the entire world. In Portuguese, it's called açúcar. Here is a loaf of American-style worthless bread with no traditional value, which fortunately is mostly not what Brazilians eat, but you can find it. It's called pão de forma. Forma means form or pan. It's pan bread rather than the kind of bread that the rest of the world eats, which is not in a pan. They make little rolls and French-style baguettes, which the Brazilians also make. They call them carecas, which also means bald. Here's a package of eggs called ovos in Portuguese. Here's some ham, which is called presunto in Portuguese. Here is a an example of a whole frozen chicken called frango. And this is made by a large corporation in Brazil, or sold by a large corporation in Brazil called Sadia. And the teenagers loved I always was trying to make jokes with the words. Sadia is just a name like Jones or Smith, but it's very close to the word for health. So I would call this the Salud chicken, Salud frango instead of Sadia frango. And then I thought it would be interesting to demonstrate that there's more than one word for chicken, just like there is in English. We have the word for hen, the words for rooster and pullet and chick. Well, for some reason, when it's a whole chicken, it's called frango. But when it's in soup, it's called sopa de galinha. I believe galinha means hen. So I guess maybe they only use hens to make the soup. Here is a jar of instant coffee made by Café Pelé. Pelé is still a big name in Brazil. If you are familiar with soccer, you have heard of Pelé, the soccer player. He's a Brazilian hero. So this is his coffee. It's called café, which is a fairly easy one to know because we actually use that word in English. I found it remarkable. If you wanted to drink American-style coffee, it was going to be instant. Everyone I knew who wanted to drink the kind of coffee we drink used instant jars. And in my research over the past day, it seems like that's still mostly how they drink American-style coffee. In the Brazilian-style coffee is a little tiny coffee like an espresso called cafezinho, and those are made with freshly ground coffee beans. But for a cup of good old American coffee, it was always instant. Peanut butter. Peanuts are called amendoim, and butter is manteiga. So it actually is just like we would call it in English. They call peanut butter, but using the Portuguese words. This was another one that was always confusing to me when I was talking to people, because cookies are called biscoitos. But the next slide, crackers are also called biscoitos. So you always had to distinguish about whether you were talking about biscoitos dulce, sweet, or biscoitos salgado, salty. I'm glad we have two words for cookies and crackers in English. And one of my favorite foods, ice cream in Portuguese, is called sorvete. Sorvete, something for me to point out as I'm talking, is that I lived in the northeastern corner of Brazil on the mouth of the Amazon. And where I lived is kind of like the Mississippi of Brazil, or the West Virginia. And so all the other Brazilians make fun of the accent of the northeastern Brazilians, which is what I have. So when I talk to Brazilians today, they always comment on my accent that I sound like a hillbilly. And that ch that you hear me making with all the T's is very nordestino, very northeastern. One of my favorite words in Portuguese is the word for popcorn. It's called pipoca, and I just love the alliteration that it has. Very similar to how we say popcorn because it pops. They say pipoca because it pops around. And I distinctly remember looking at these packages in the grocery store and learning the word for microwave, which is micro-onda. You can see that also on the package. This is dish soap for washing your dishes. Brazilians call it detergente líquido. Detergente líquido. And this is bath soap, sabonete, which is just a bar of soap, which for some reason was much more expensive than buying what we would call a shower gel. Most Brazilians use shower gel, so that was cheaper, and so that's what I got used to using also. Here's a nice one, shampoo. Guess what? They say shampoo. It's exactly the same word. I learned, I don't remember if this was in Brazil or because of my years teaching ESL, but shampoo is a Hindi word that both languages have adopted. A toothbrush was called an escova dental. That was easy enough for me to remember. Escova is the word for brush, So any kind of brush was an escova. And then dental means teeth, obviously. Here is the creme dental, or the toothpaste. You can see that they had many American brands. There was Colgate, there was Hellmann's, Nestle, which actually isn't American, but lots of things were made by Nestle. So that's basically the end of my little presentation on the words that I learned at the grocery store, practicing my literacy practice of reading packages and picking things out when I went grocery shopping. I'd like to thank Kevin MacLeod for the royalty-free use of his musical piece Bossa Bossa, which is under the Creative Commons license. And special thanks to Pixabay for royalty-free use of the Brazilian flag and the Brazilian images, with no required attribution. The images of the Brazilian groceries are the property of Supermercado Extra, which is a large grocery store located in Brazil. Thank you, and ciao.